Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Welcome back to another week, a great weekend full of football, whether it be college or NFL, so a lot of subject matter to cover on today's show. We start off in the world of college football, a little bit of a fantasy recap of all the amazing performances from this weekend. We look ahead to tonight's game, actually, between the Atlanta Falcons and the Philadelphia Eagles in terms of the general betting odds and also some popular prop bets for tonight. And then we conclude with some fantasy stars from the NFL and some players you might want to drop ahead of week 3. But before we get into any of that lovely content, I do want to remind you to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. Anything you do is greatly appreciated by all concerned. Also, you guys have been doing a fantastic job of this, and I want to continue to have this show be as interactive as possible. Make yourselves available to the Super Chat, the Super Thanks, and Super Sticker features on YouTube so that this show can be all about you as well as me. I don't want to just ramble on about my opinions. I want to hear yours. So if you are feeling so inclined, whether it be a question, comment, concern, even a tip or donation as well, I will address them on the show. Get your comment in and incorporate it, and we can make this show even better than it already is. Without further ado, let us jump right into today's show, and we're sticking with this graphic today. We talk about the world of college football. A lot of interesting games, not as many matchups in the top 25 as the past couple of weeks, but still, nonetheless, there were very solid performances at each and every single skill position, especially in fantasy terms. And we see a lot of these players, as they begin to get deeper into the season, we start to see the potential of each and every single one of them. And this list is probably my most diverse yet. Obviously, I can't always talk about Quinn Ewers, even though, he did go down with injury. But this list is very deserving. All of these players put in a shift this week in the world of college football. So let's talk about them. And we start off with a quarterback who a lot of people are saying can be in the Heisman consideration. A lot of hype surrounding this guy. Big in terms of the explosive play, and that is Mr. Jalen Milroe out of the Alabama Crimson Tide. This guy truly embodies what it is to play college football. He is everything that you want in terms of excitement and hype in a college football player. 12 for 17. 196 total yards, 3 touchdowns, as you see on my screen. Also added 14 carries for 75 yards and 2 TDs for a total of 39.3 fantasy points. Now that the quarterback landscape is starting to get settled, we're starting to see more and more of them maintain their level of success or even get better. And the thing I love about Jalen Milroe in this Alabama offense is that it's meant for the big play. He may not always have, solid games like a Quinn Ewers where he's just completing accurate passes, getting the ball out quick, but he is due for these kind of big explosive plays that really gets you a lot in terms of fantasy production, and he can do it with both his arms and his legs. It's not just all about getting it to his diverse group of pass catchers, but also about maintaining that ground game, which has always been one of the main aspects of what makes Jalen Milroe so excitable as a player. And so, just wanted to respect him in a week where there were a lot of quarterback performances. I got to choose one. We're going to address another one kind of towards the end of this segment. But for now, just know that Jalen Milroe is always due for an excitable game every once in a while. Let's talk about some running backs, or actually a wide receiver first, shall we? This wide receiver right here, Luther Burden III, might just be the best wide receiver in terms of the class that we see in college football right now. Luther Burden is one of those guys who we haven't really seen much tape of, I would like to say, if we're, a casual fan, but he is someone who does deserve the respect that he should get. And for 6 receptions, 117 yards this weekend, 1 touchdown in a top 25 matchup for 20.7 fantasy points. It just goes to show that he should get respect. And I think that in terms of the wide receivers, there are a lot of exciting guys, but some of them have been underperforming, whereas Luther Burden III is starting to get the feel as someone who can be a NFL pro-ready player. So look out for him in dynasty leagues as well in future years, because Luther Burden III, in my humble opinion, is the wide receiver 1 in college football at this moment in time. And he's going to have a lot of opportunities to show that come SEC play. Now let's talk about that exciting running back. And this guy is someone who's been around the block a little bit in the SEC. Played for Arkansas, got a lot of cult status there, now moved to South Carolina, and in what was one of the best games of the weekend, nearly led his team to victory. I'm talking about Raheem Rocket Sanders. 19 carries, 142 yards, 2 touchdowns on the day for 27.9 fantasy points. Now, Rocket Sanders is one of those guys who we don't often hear about in terms of SEC Power 4 running backs, what have you, because he's always been a guy who kind of got tossed to the wayside a little bit for playing on average Arkansas teams. And against a LSU team that was a little bit vulnerable, in a game which, South Carolina could have won, he was the reason why they were in it. His quarterback goes down early, and he steps up to the plate. A couple of big touchdown runs later in the game to keep them in it. So respect to Raheem Sanders for, being a guy who really can step up at any time. And in terms of fantasy college football, it's a hidden gem. If you know about him from before and his cult status carries over, kudos to you, because he truly is a treasure in SEC football. I think that South Carolina, they might not be as competitive. Lenore Sellers was kind of this hyped quarterback with his dual threat ability. Now that he's injured, we'll have to see the timeline and extent of his injury. South Carolina might not be as competitive as before, but just know that Raheem Sanders could be the new Ollie Gordon, except that I feel like a lot of people who follow college football very closely do kind of know about him. But yes, I think that this kind of level of success for him will continue, and it should continue into SEC play and somewhat keep South Carolina afloat in what should be a more manageable schedule than most in SEC play. But the final quarterback I want to talk about is a guy who has been getting a lot of hype and looks like someone who could easily play 2 positions in college right now. He is someone who is very savvy with his playing style, learning the college game very quickly, and immediately becoming someone who could be the center of attention in CFP circles and when it comes to the selection committee's choices, and that is Avery Johnson. It was a very crucial early game. Well, not necessarily crucial in that it was a non-conference game, because at the time it was set up, they weren't in the same conference, but a game against Arizona, who will be in the Big 12 and will be included as a conference game in the future. Avery Johnson really stepped up. I thought that the defenses were going to be the difference, and one of them was. The K-State defense really set the tone, really contained that QB wide receiver duo of Noah Fafita and Tetaroa McMillan very well. And then Avery Johnson just supplemented it so well. He really came out there and showed why a lot of people were paying attention to his dual threat ability coming out of high school. And this might not be his best game of his college career, but it certainly is crucial, because a lot of Kansas State's potential to be a CFP team stems from his play. And for 14 of 23, 156 yards, 2 touchdowns to the air, and 17 rush attempts and 110 yards on the ground, I really think there's a lot of bang for your buck if you're a fantasy college football player with Avery Johnson. He's just going to continue to develop as the season goes along and as Kansas State becomes viewed more and more as a threat to win the Big 12 title. And it's very important that even though it's technically still a non-conference game, he's ready to take that step no matter who is in the Big 12 right now. So everyone should be scared of Mr. Avery Johnson. But overall, in terms of college football this year, a lot of different players have potential to break out and be included as fantasy stars. We've seen kind of a repetitive start, I promise it's not biased because of Quinn Ewers' ascension. But now, Quinn Ewers is hurt. I could have easily put Arch Manning there, but I wanted to give respect to more quarterbacks outside of just Texas. So, as we see, fantasy college football is always going to be a little bit more volatile than regular NFL fantasy football, which I promise we'll get into. Seeing as to how a lot of these players still stem from the SEC, though, I would like to see a little bit more Group of 5 love in the future. I did mention Ashton Jeanty as someone who's a hidden gem in terms of fantasy college football, and he's someone who's quickly vaulting up draft boards as well. I like that John Mateer kid out of Washington State, even though he's technically in a Power 4 conference, the Pac-2, he's still kind of profiled as an under-the-radar guy. And there's still so many different college football players out there who I think are appealing in fantasy college football. But let me know what you think in the comments, because this will just about do it for this segment of today's show. I love talking college football with you guys. If you want to continue seeing this kind of thing, let me know, because I know there are some college football heads out there. But coming up next on today's show, we turn our heads to tonight's game, Monday Night Football between the Atlanta Falcons and the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to be doing a general betting preview, then be looking at some popular prop bets as well. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you that if you feel so inclined, you've been doing a great job of this thus far. Make yourselves available to and continue making yourselves available to. Definitely not Avery Johnson just now. The Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They are a great way to interact with the show. You guys have been doing an incredible job, like I said. So if you want to continue doing that, leaving questions, comments, concerns, even tips and donations are appreciated as well. And they're a huge support to me, my fellow podcasters, and the network as a whole. So thank you in advance for all you do for the shows and the network here. But without further ado, let us jump right into our second segment of the day's show, and let's talk about Monday Night Football tonight. A battle of the birds that the Atlanta Falcons take on the Philadelphia Eagles, and the betting odds for this game really are kind of straightforward. I think that I don't even have to give you my prediction. I already think that the Philadelphia Eagles will easily handle this game. And so it's a matter of whether or not all these odds hit for you, right? Because when you have a Monday night game like this where, it's kind of set even before it's played on the field, you can take more risk, but you also have to be aware of the fact that the spread can change any time. That being said, the Battle of the Birds tonight feels definitely one-sided, even with A.J. Brown being downgraded to being out for tonight's game with a hamstring issue. And the reason I say that is because if what we saw from the Atlanta Falcons in Week 1 continues, then I see no way that Kirk Cousins becomes comfortable in this system. Because you can't just take a quarterback, a 35-year-old one nonetheless, coming off a torn Achilles, and put him in an offensive setup that's unfamiliar to him. You can't run pistol with a guy who's never run pistol in his career. Only run it 2 times before that first game last week in, Minnesota system. So Kirk Cousins definitely feels a little bit stiff right now. Whereas the excitement and hype surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles offense is higher than ever. And now that they're back home on home soil, I definitely feel like their big play threats will become even bigger. Now, yes, A.J. Brown is a huge loss, and we don't know if anyone will be able to step up in his place. But they still have Devontae Smith. They still have one of the more underrated tight ends in the league in Dallas Goedert. And Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley form a formidable backfield, much like what we saw in Brazil last week. And so I have much less worries surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles right now than the Atlanta Falcons. And that is why they're hefty favorites, minus 6.5 points. And the over-under is 48.5. So let's talk about this over-under, because I think it's simple to say that Philly will be doing most of the scoring here. Now, I can't necessarily say whether or not, Atlanta can find their footing. It will most likely have to come down to the defense here to keep them ahead of schedule, try and get as many stops as possible. And I wouldn't put it past them, right? Even though the Steelers' offense isn't a formidable foe, they still held them to field goals, and it's not their fault that those field goals won in the game because they can only do so much. But at the end of the day, Atlanta's defense might be better than we give them credit for. It's going to be a tough test even without A.J. Brown there, but I feel like if Atlanta wants to have a chance in this game, they're going to have to win the turnover battle here. Whereas, when I look at the Eagles' defense, this is a defense that is really perplexing right now, because I feel like it could be one of the best in the league, right? You have a lot of depth up front, a lot of youth up front, a lot of youth in the secondary as well, but then you're starting to try and meld them with the veterans that you have in this roster, like a Darius Slay, like even though he's still technically one of the younger guys on the team, like a Reed Blankenship. Whereas with the Falcons, they acquired a lot of depth to really blend this team well. I like the pickup of Matthew Judon. I like that he's going to be kind of a mentor to A.J. Terrell in that linebacking core. And I think that Jesse Bates III, like I said, is one of the most savvy safeties in the NFL. As Shots Below the Belt says, taking the Falcons plus 6.5. What's your score prediction, my guy? Thank you for joining the chat, Shots Below the Belt. Unfortunately, that's a very risky bet, my man. I like the Philadelphia Eagles in this one. And it's not a knock on the Falcons. I love this Falcons team if it all comes together. But from what I saw last week in that game against Pittsburgh, and yes, I will give you that Pittsburgh defense, it's a tough defense. I still think that they're trying to get through the progressions here. They're going through the motions early on in the season. I think that the Falcons will have a say in the NFC South and try and contend, but they're a little bit behind the 8 ball right now. And I think that will continue tonight. That being said, it could be closer than people think. So you're not wrong in looking at the spread and saying that might be a little bit more than the Philadelphia Eagles and Atlanta Falcons give in. So it's an ambitious bet, but I appreciate the comment. I appreciate the question. In terms of score predictions, I say it will be Philly 31, Atlanta 20. I think that Atlanta will keep it close for a little bit longer than people think, But Philly's offense is the difference in this one. And Saquon's going to be the difference, especially in this one. So thank you for the question, my man. If anyone else wants to keep on commenting, keep it going. But in terms of these teams against the spread, Philly's already 1-0 this season. Falcons 0-1. And Philly right now, as shots below the belt says, nice score. Thank you, my man. Philly is minus 110 to cover. Atlanta is minus 105 to cover. So if you're betting like shots below the belt right now, I would say that you feel pretty comfortable saying that this could be a closer game than expected, but I want to kind of delve deeper into what I saw on the field. Because Monday night games are always going to be weird to bet, right? Because they're always the last game of the week, and the extra day of rest, could come into play. And Philly had that crazy game in Brazil, and the Falcons, really didn't get it going against Pittsburgh. So it's a weird kind of Monday night game right now. But I feel more confident from the eye test with Philly. Now, I can't necessarily indict the Falcons completely here because, yes, we do expect a lot out of them, but they still are a team that's trying to gel right now. All the pieces are kind of trying to cohere into one, and it's going to take some time. This game just doesn't feel like a winnable kind of marker for them. With that being said, ambitious betting can get you far shots below the belt, so I'm not opposed to that bet. Let's kind of do a game synopsis here. What could happen in this game? Because A.J. Brown's out, so it could kind of change the game script here for Philly. Now, what I like about Atlanta's defense is that there are so many ways you can send blitzes, and they're confident enough in their secondary that they feel like they can win turnover battles in any game they play. Raheem Morris always is going to be confident in the defensive side of the ball. Now, what Zach Robinson did in that first game might have just been indicative of maybe something he saw in the Pittsburgh defense that maybe he thought he could take advantage of, but it obviously didn't work. And I think a big part of the Falcons going forward is going to be Kirk Cousins and how he fits into whatever Zach Robinson sets up. Now, I feel confident that if, they use Kirk as a game manager, that could be the best for him because he's not going to, in pistol formations, want to roll out very comfortably, even though he's very solid in play action. So, if Zach Robinson can really focus on keeping Cousins healthy, keeping him upright, and keeping him confident, keeping him ahead of schedule, keeping him in a nice rhythm in this Atlanta Falcons offense, then they could have something going. But right now, as I see it, I don't think their offense will get going this much in this game. That being said, if, the defense can keep them in contests early, that should be enough for them. As we get a long comment here, as Shots Below the Belt says, how many more bad games can Kirk Cousins have before the Falcons put in Penix? The way the NFC South is looking, shocking 2-0 starts from the Saints and the Bucks. Falcons can't afford to go 0-2, and that's a fantastic point. If Kirk Cousins does underwhelm tonight, I wouldn't be surprised if Raheem Morris says Michael Penix is starting. And I think a lot of Falcons fans might want that too. I think that right now, you're going to have to see what Cousins is a little bit longer because he did invest so much money into him. But I do think that Michael Penix can get this offense going if he's asked to step in. I think that there's a lot of positives in terms of the players that he has at his disposal. Yes, there were a couple of questions about the offensive line and their impact on Cousins' abilities in that game against Pittsburgh, but they're not playing Pittsburgh every week. The NFC South is going to just get more and more competitive, and this is a division that still feels winnable, even if, the Falcons start off in a little bit of turmoil. Yes, we put a lot of pressure on them because of what they did this offseason. That does not mean that I think that this team can't grow and progress this season, no matter who is starting at QB. That's a fantastic point. There might be a little bit of unrest in Atlanta should Kirk Cousins continue to not be the answer because of the fact that they believed that he was going to be the guy to jumpstart this offense with all these weapons in it. So it's going to depend a lot on how the Falcons use Kirk Cousins and how they get him comfortable in order to win games. Tonight, I'm not as confident in them. I am taking Philly in this one, even though the spread is very favorable for both teams. So make risks if you want to. I'm not opposed to them because this game definitely feels like it could be a weird one. But let me know what you think in the comments. Coming up next, though, we are going to be looking at some prop bets for tonight's game that was largely affected by the injury to A.J. Brown. I'll tell you why right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Our next segment, kind of following that betting theme, we're going to be looking at some popular prop bets for tonight's game. Now, like I said before the break, these have been heavily impacted by the loss of A.J. Brown for the Philadelphia Eagles. But that just means the betting kind of market gets a little bit more interesting. So let's talk about a couple of nice bets coming up for tonight's game. The first one, kind of my mistake. A.J. Brown to score a touchdown. I felt very confident in this before I heard the news of the injury. So disregard this. But had he played, based off the form I saw from him last week, I would have put it past him at plus 110. Unfortunate. Hope he has a speedy recovery because we've seen a lot of injuries, especially to the wide receiver position this past weekend. So hope they all have speedy recoveries, but it is what it is, and that just means more opportunities for different members of the Philadelphia Eagles offense to step up. As Anthony Manzano says, question before you talk about prop bets: with these constant short week injuries with players, do you think eventually the NFL might think of taking away Thursday night games, no matter how much money? That's an interesting question, Anthony. I appreciate that one because it definitely gives perspective and light to the amount of injuries that have been sustained. And especially now that it definitely feels like, even though it's not like soccer where you're playing all the time, that there is a congested sense to the schedule, right? Where now it's a 17-game slate. It's definitely affecting these players, and it's taking a toll on them. So, to your point, I think that I feel like Thursday night games as well kind of lose their luster as well. So I wouldn't be mad if the NFL took them away. And also, they're kind of bad matchups, to be honest, as well. They're not appealing that much. So it's definitely kind of this quid pro quo between the NFL and all these ownerships to kind of come to a conclusion where they want better safety for these players. And so I'm thinking of this from a fan perspective. Do I, A, want to watch a midweek game where, it might not be as appealing, and B, one of my favorite players in the league could get injured? Or do I want to continue seeing it and have it be the most unappealing of the primetime games? I feel like a lot of people have grown disaffected with it as well. That's a very interesting question as well. So thank you for this update, and we hope that all those players who are injured have speedy recoveries, because we don't wish the worst for them, because we want them to succeed as much as anything. But A.J. Brown, unfortunately, did do this, a little bit of graphic here, before hearing the news, so that's why, but it is kind of unfortunate, and it does shed light on the injury crisis in the NFL right now. But speaking of a guy coming back from injury and kind of not, stepping up to the plate, I don't necessarily fault him for it, but we're going to have to see. This is a big litmus test for him. Kirk Cousins, though, will have under 226.5 pass yards. Minus 114. Here's the thing. I think that Kirk can succeed in an offense where he can get the ball out quickly. But it's going to be a very slow process for him. As Andre says, come on, Kirk. I mean, I appreciate the hype surrounding Kirk. I love that Kirk kind of resembles a sense of hope and optimism for this Falcons fan base. But right now, just based off what I saw last week, this could be something that we come back to when you guys can say, I told you so, if Kirk Cousins performs. I just don't see, from what we saw last week, him being ambitious enough for this offense. And now, going back to the point that Shots Below the Belt brought up about Penix, you now have this weird contingency plan where you kind of feel like, and you're expecting almost, that Kirk Cousins could be set up to fail. Because that Michael Penix pick definitely was very skeptical when it happened. But let's say Kirk Cousins, it starts off 0-4. What's going to be made of Atlanta right now? And I think that we are over-exaggerating the Bucs and say I think the Bucs will stick around. The Saints I'm going to have to see. That was a very impressive performance from them. But right now, I think that the NFC South is still an attainable goal for the Atlanta Falcons. It just is a matter of breaking that barrier between the Kirk Cousins of the Achilles injury and the Kirk Cousins of the Atlanta Falcons. And so, right now, as much as I want to appreciate Kirk Cousins as a quarterback, tonight's game is going to underline some of his inefficiencies. And it's not going to be a pretty game for him. So, under 226.5 passing yards will be my pick for him. Because I don't want to start this segment off on a sad note. I don't like talking about guys in ways that don't necessarily undermine them, but aren't, about the bigger picture concerning their play. But Kirk Cousins just doesn't feel ready to assume the mantle of Falcons QB right now. And with the pressure and the different style of offense that Zach Robinson, the new OC, wants to employ, it doesn't feel like it's going to work for very long. But let's get to more hopeful prop bets for this week, because with the absence of A.J. Brown, more opportunities will be availed to the many weapons that Philadelphia has at its disposal. Starting off with Saquon Barkley, probably the most impressive player from Week 1. I'm just going to put it out there. Saquon really stepped up to the plate as someone who just makes this Philly offense more versatile. It looked like he took a lot of pressure off Jalen Hurts' shoulders. Hopefully this continues week by week, because he is going to be a big X factor. I feel like it's kind of going to come down to how they use him in certain situations. But what we saw in Brazil from him really was fascinating to watch. It was vintage Saquon. And what he's going to do for this team tonight should be nothing short of impressive again. I think he's going to have over 77.5 rush yards at minus 114. And I think that a lot of people would feel comfortable betting on Saquon right now. And the running back market is getting thinner and thinner. We have so many injuries at that position as well. Saquon just feels like the answer right now. I'm knocking on wood because he also has a lengthy injury history. But right now, Saquon just feels like he's reinvigorating this team, the running back market, and really setting a stamp as someone to be reckoned with in the NFC. And games like this in prime time will be indicative of what Saquon can do. So this bet just seems like chalk at this point. I'm really high on Saquon after what I saw in this offense. And so I do feel like he is going to be one of, if not the best players in this game. But that being said, I will say he's going to have under 15.5 receiving yards. I think that Jalen, lost a big piece. So it seems weird to say that Saquon will be under, but I feel like Jalen Hurts is not going to worry as much about, the loss of A.J. Brown. I think he's going to be very comfortable in trying to get more pieces incorporated into the offense, show the depth. And Saquon could be an interesting contingency plan in terms of the receiving game and an interesting security blanket as well. But I just have a lot of confidence in what the Eagles can do offensively. They don't necessarily have to rely on Saquon in the receiving game if they want. So it's going to come down to, what the Falcons' defense can do. If the Falcons' defense can keep them in the game, then maybe I'll be very wrong about Saquon in that regard. But I feel like Saquon just adds a lot of value on the ground for this game, and I think that in terms of the Eagles, should they see that the Falcons are really pressuring their pass catchers, then they can shift to more of a run-style game, really grind them down, and take over in that sense. So look out for Saquon tonight. And the final bet should be a popular one because Devontae Smith is now the man for tonight's game. Over 62.5 receiving yards. Could even go over 100. I'm not putting it past him. Now, I think that the best part of what Philly can do is that Devontae Smith can either play in the slot, which allows A.J. Brown to go vertical, or Devontae could just go vertical himself. And what was the most puzzling part of that as well was that sometimes Jalen Hurts didn't necessarily have the deep ball in him. So tonight could be a good way to kind of figure out different vertical route trees for both of these players, even though A.J. Brown isn't going to be involved. I want to see Devontae Smith be varied tonight, but I also want to see how they handle him going vertically, how many times he's going to go vertically. Because, like I said, the Falcons' secondary is definitely underrated. It's going to be something of interest to watch in this game because I think that they will be able to keep the Falcons in this one because of the fact that I think that their defensive game plan will be to pressure these pass catchers from Philly. But Devontae Smith could be someone to have a breakout day. Now, should Jalen Hurts kind of give the ball over to Saquon a little bit more, I could see a world in which Devontae Smith does not have a big day, but he's always going to be someone to split defensive minds. Kind of, you have to account for him wherever he aligns on the field. So look for Devontae Smith to impact the game in more ways than one. He can be someone who would be a decoy. He can help, vertically if they choose to do that. Or most importantly, he's just there as a matchup problem because he's starting to become more and more like a wide receiver when he's up to A.J. Brown's level, I believe, in this offense. So it's going to come down to whether or not he can step up in his absence in terms of how much of this offense will go through him in the future. But let me know what you think in the comments because that will just about do it for this segment. Coming up next, we transition from the fantasy stars of college football from earlier to the fantasy stars of the NFL. A lot of storylines from this weekend to talk about. We'll be right back after this quick break to talk about that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show thus far. We are going to be looking at right now some fantasy stars of the NFL this past weekend, week 2. Crazy storylines here. A lot of different things happened, a lot of players that we could have talked about, but the list that I've called together here is highly indicative of some surprising teams and some teams that feel like they can be contenders right now. But without further ado, let us jump right into it. If you have any comments as well, I would love to hear them because I have my own personal fantasy stars, but you might have been impressed by other performances as well. Without further ado, let's talk about my personal fantasy stars of the week. How about Derek Carr, man? Let's talk about Derek Carr. I did say a little bit earlier in the month that the one saving grace about Derek Carr that could prevent him from being a kind of bench rider or waiver wire option in fantasy is his deep ball. But as much as he and Rashid Shaheed had developed that deep connection, he really is proving that his offense really can take on many different colors here. He can wear many different hats in this offense. He had a long screen touchdown. He had that deep route to Rashid Shaheed, and he kept everyone involved. 21.82 fantasy points, 243 yards through the air, 2 TDs, 1 interception. Really impressive what I'm seeing from Derek Carr. He looks 5 years younger, and just goes to show that in an offensive system that you feel like you can take advantage of, you can shine no matter your age. And Clint Kubiak is doing a great job early on in the season, really setting the tone for these guys in that Saints offense. And looking at the Saints right now, this Saints offense could be scary. They have a lot of speed. They have a lot of options in the receiving game, whereas beforehand, a lot of people were saying, oh, it's going to be Derek Carr's fault that this team can't get going. Now they can confidently say that Derek Carr can be the answer going forward for the Saints. But let's talk about his backfield partner as well, because we have to give him credit. His second 4-touchdown performance, Alvin Kamara, 44 fantasy points, 20 carries, 115 yards, 3 TDs on the ground. And I had my concerns about Alvin Kamara because even though we've talked about him very positively here on this podcast, I think that age was one of the factors that came into play. And he is aging, but like fine wine is what Alvin Kamara is right now. And Alvin Kamara just profiles as someone who is back like he never left. And if he's really committed to this offense, and Clint Kubiak is really committed to getting him the ball, he'll be a breath of fresh air. And I think that the Saints really need him in order to truly be seen in my mind as contenders, because I have faith that somehow, some way, the NFC South is going to get muddier than usual. I think that the Buccaneers and Saints are aberrations in terms of their 2-0 starts, and the Falcons could go 0-2 tonight, and I still think that any one of those teams can win this division. That being said, Alvin Kamara is the X factor in all of that right now, because I still think the Saints are kind of pretenders because of the fact that, well, I'm not certain about, say, the Dallas Cowboys right now. Because that win, while impressive, we've seen that blueprint before from some different teams. That's what my boss has been talking about. We've seen the ground and pound blueprint for beating Dallas before. So it's not like the Saints really came out there and beat a good defense into a pulp in a way that nobody's ever seen. I want to see them do it week in, week out with consistency, and I want to see Alvin Kamara be the centerpiece of this offense while Derek Carr plays complementary football. But at the end of the day, I'm liking what I see so far from the New Orleans Saints. So kudos to them. Let's talk about another running back, though. A guy who, for some reason, still isn't technically the starting running back on his team. They've been saying that they've been riding the hot hand, Harbaugh. But this guy's been one of the hottest running backs in the league so far. So I don't see why they're not handing him the keys to the car just yet. J.K. Dobbins, 17 carries, 131 yards, 1 TD, 20.1 fantasy points. And the reason why J.K. Dobbins might not have won the starting job is, yes, injury, and they want to keep both of them kind of as healthy as possible because technically that's their whole offense right now, because of the way that Jim Harbaugh wants to play his philosophy and style of football. But J.K. Dobbins, man, is someone who I've always said, if he can stay healthy, can appreciate the fact that even though he's in a committee approach, he might just be the best running back in that committee approach, then he could be one of the best running backs in the NFL right now. And that's what he's looked like through 2 weeks of play. And seeing as to how the Chargers have the advantage of being 2-0 right now, J.K. Dobbins can become someone who might potentially be our RB1, but could also be an interesting flex option, because I still think in the back of my mind that this Harbaugh thing won't work out all the time. And it's the Panthers coming up. They beat the Panthers and they beat the Raiders. So, yes, that plan can work, but 22-10 kind of games don't happen very often in the NFL. And they certainly don't happen in an NFL that wants to get more modernized in terms of offensive schemes. So, I appreciate J.K. Dobbins, but just know that maybe this whole Harbaugh project is a facade of what to see and expect out of the Chargers. But kudos to them for being 2-0, and kudos for J.K. Dobbins for being someone who you could trust early on in the season. Let's talk about a wide receiver who I did not have being one of the better fantasy wide receivers right now on my bingo card this season. How about Chris Godwin? Let me tell you a story about Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin was on my fantasy team. And some of the times, he would be the reason that my fantasy team won, but most of the time last year, he would be the reason my team lost because he didn't have impressive performances. And you can chalk it up to him being in a wide receiver room with one of the best wide receivers of the modern NFL era. But at this current moment in time, Chris Godwin is proving that he might just be one of the best wide receiver twos in the league right now. 7 receptions, 117 yards, 1 TD, 24.7 FP. And let's talk about the Tampa Bay Bucs offense, because they are really becoming one of the more attractive teams in the NFL because Baker is getting more confident, because he's starting to trust more offensive minds, because he's starting to understand the nuances of good receivers like Mike Evans and Godwin. And so maybe we should have seen this kind of duality in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense beforehand. But Chris Godwin's really been impressive. And if they can continue this, then maybe my predictions about the NFC South becoming a bit muddy or a moot point, because the Bucs just run away with this division. And they got a huge win against Detroit on the road to kind of supplement that theory. But at the end of the day, Chris Godwin's going to always be someone who I kind of want to see more out of, and where to really cement his status as a solid wide receiver 2 week in, week out. But right now, the early signs are looking very good. So kudos to Chris Godwin for his improvement and maturation in this offense, along with Baker and Mike Evans. But let's talk about another wide receiver. Let's talk about a rookie guy, a young buck. A guy who, in this first game in the NFL, did not meet expectations. And maybe that was because him and his quarterback weren't gelling. There were some comments made about that. But MHJ and Kyler Murray, in the late window, were two of the best performers, and perhaps the best fantasy stars I could have picked this week. In the first quarter alone, 29.9 fantasy points from Marvin Harrison Jr. That would be all he had, and it would be all he needed to have, because the Cardinals really impressed me, even when they were just going down there and kicking field goals. This offense had a schedule. Kyler was magnificent, perfect passer rating, 266 yards, 3 TDs. And let's talk about how Arizona is in a position right now to either play spoiler or potentially compete for a wild card spot. That's what we're talking about. I really enjoyed watching that offense, even as a Seattle Seahawks fan, even as an NFC West fan. I enjoyed the Arizona Cardinals so much. Not because, they were winning games by hook or by crook, because they took that game against LA by the neck. Yes, you can chalk up to injuries. You can chalk it up to the Rams' offense not being up to par. But it was a huge statement win from this Arizona Cardinals team. I'm really excited going forward to see how this MHJ and Kyler connection pans out, because it could pay dividends in fantasy. If you're having MHJ put up 29.9 points in the first quarter alone, have that be enough to carry you, then that's in your praise. And I told you, Kyler Murray is going to have big performances this season more often than not. As this offense gets more comfortable, Kyler's just going to do and play playground football. And the Cardinals are going to be fun to watch. They're going to put up numbers. And most importantly, they're going to win you fantasy games. So, overall, I'm really confident in this Fantasy Stars list. Couldn't have come up with a better list. You can talk about a lot of players. I could have put my boy Geno Smith on there, throwing the ball as well as anyone in the league right now. But at this current moment in time, all of these Fantasy Stars, whether we expected them or not, really are intriguing as we head into Week 3 of the NFL season. But let me know what you think in the comments. I really enjoyed talking about them. Let me know if you have any other fantasy stars that you want to talk about. As Shots Below the Belt says, you writing him off, bro? Ha ha ha. I'm not writing off my man Geno Smith at all. I think that if he's still in deeper leagues on the waiver wire, pick him up immediately, because Geno Smith is someone who I really love, and Seahawks fans have grown to love as well as anyone in the league. So thank you, Shots Below the Belt. But we have to go a quick break. LOL, awesome, says Shots Below the Belt. We have to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll finish the show with some disappointments, so to speak. Players that we're going to have to drop this week, whether due to injury or just because they are underperforming. We'll be right back to finish the show after this quick break. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the final segment here on today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And we kind of have to end on a disappointing note because of all the injuries, because of a little bit of underperformance in the early goings-on of the NFL season. We have to talk about some players you might want to drop ahead of Week 3, which should be a pivotal week. And I want to do this segment because of the underperformance we've seen from certain players in this league. But as we've alluded to here in the comments, and some people have, the injury crisis has been going crazy. We don't know which star player who you expect to have fantastic fantasy numbers will go down next, so we always have to keep our pulse on these injury updates as shots below the belt. So just to name a few here: DeAndre Swift, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Christian Kirk, and Trevor Lawrence. All about Jacksonville Jaguars offense. I see shots below the belt. A nod to the GSMC's network there. But there are some players I have on my personal list that we have a same through line here that we could agree about here. So one of those names that I want to talk about that's not a Jacksonville Jaguar to start off today is DeAndre Swift, because he is on my fantasy team and he was just atrocious. And you can chalk it up to the Bears being absolutely awful on offense early on, but come on, man. DeAndre Swift, this is a guy who's been around the league. He had a career year last year with Philly, was one of the most promising prospects early on for a Detroit Lions team that had just hired Dan Campbell and was trying to get their offense going. And I believe he was brought to the Bears to be an experienced player in the backfield for Caleb. But between two games, he's just been absolutely god-awful. And I feel bad because I wanted him to do well. I liked him in the fantasy draft. I saw him. I believe it was in the 4th or 5th round. It was like, DeAndre Swift, this is a guy who I have a lot of faith in. Yes, the Bears offense might want to go towards receivers more, but DeAndre Swift, I'm going to take a shot on him. There are 2 weeks I want to drop him immediately. So DeAndre Swift is someone who, if you had high hopes about, drafted him, expected a lot out of him, that Bears offense, immediately drop him. Which is something I'm going to do immediately come tomorrow morning to pick up someone and hopefully find someone better on the waiver wire. Let's talk about another running back that shots below the belt actually did not mention, but I mentioned in one of my prior shows as kind of a strategy to make the most out of an injury, the Jonathan Brooks one. Chuba Hubbard. The less we say about the Panthers offense, the better. Let's just put it that way. I really thought that Chuba Hubbard could settle down this Panthers offense, and who knows? Now the Panthers shockingly benched Bryce Young and bring in Andy Dalton, that backfield can be humming again, and maybe they can get going there. But for now, as long as the Panthers offense remains incompetent, we'll have to see how Andy Dalton runs it. I just don't see any way that Chuba Hubbard can be justified. He's still on waivers in my league, and I'm not shocked anymore. I was shocked kind of early in the season that nobody was talking about him because of the Brooks injury. But then again, what can we expect out of the Carolina Panthers offense? Just an awfully run organization, and they really are directionless right now, and that's perhaps why they've turned to Andy Dalton, the veteran, in that Dave Canales offense to take over. So Chuba Hubbard, I was really expecting more out of him, but someone we have to drop. But let's talk about a little bit of injuries, and then we can address, before we finish our show, shots below the belts, personal players to drop in fantasy. So let's start off with a big one. Justin Jefferson. This injury isn't necessarily as serious as people thought, but it is one to keep in the back of your mind. He did sustain a leg contusion. My dad gave me a little update as a Vikings fan from that. And he personally said that he was shocked he didn't continue playing. So hopefully Justin Jefferson will not have to be out for that game against, I believe it's actually I'm not sure if the Vikings play, but hopefully, actually the Texans. They do play the Texans. Very important game for them. So hopefully he's not going to be out, but you do have to be aware of any updates we get from Justin Jefferson as well. And let's talk about another Justin here. Justin Herbert also suffered an injury. I believe it was a leg injury. Limping post-game. Did say he got an X-ray. So he's going to we're going to probably hear news about Justin Herbert's injury as well in the coming days here. But overall, I think both of these players can pretend to be fine for week 3. But if they're not, you might want to look to alternatives. For Justin Jefferson, I like Brandon Powell a lot in that offense. but you might want to look to the waiver wire should you be panicking about any news surrounding Justin Jefferson in the early goings. And for Justin Herbert, it's easy to supplement Justin Herbert. The QB market's wide open. A lot of guys still on the waiver wires. Mayfield, Smith, Darnold, just to name a few. Go pick them up. You shouldn't worry about Justin Herbert. And honestly, I wouldn't necessarily start Justin Herbert right now because he had 2 touchdown throws, but, it is a Jim Harbaugh offense. Let's put it that way. But let's get back to my man, shot below the belt. His personal fantasy players to drop. We talked about DeAndre Swift. And let's talk about Sam Laporta a little bit, because Sam Laporta had high expectations. We talked about him a lot on this show as someone who is kind of leading the new generation of tight ends, and thus creating that conundrum between this younger generation and some of the older guys like the Kelceys, the Kittles, the Andrews of the world. And well, through 2 weeks, the Lions offense really hasn't been going, and Sam Laporta hasn't been getting going either. And I'm really shocked that at least in the red zone, he's not a bigger threat. But what we've seen out of the Lions early on is that Jared Goff has struggled. So they've really transitioned to a more run-focused attack. And I really want Sam Laporta to perform well because he had that tight end 1 season last year, even though it was one of the worst in recent memory. So we're just going to have to wait and see if he's going to step up. That being said, for now, I agree with shots below the belt. I think that Sam Laporta is someone who will potentially not be seen as a high-end tight end anymore. He may even fall outside of the top 10, if we're being real. If the Detroit Lions offense doesn't get anything going aerially. So Sam Laporta is definitely someone I can see. Dalton Kincaid I still have hope for. He's on my fantasy team, and when I saw him in that game against the Dolphins last week, he had some moments where, he was more involved in the offense than people think. Yes, James Cook had a big game, and he's going to become the focal point of this offense rather quickly. James Cook is going to cook, and I'm glad that I have him in my personal fantasy team. But I still think Dalton Kincaid can be an X factor here, because there are going to be teams that are going to key in on stopping the run, and Josh Allen will have to improvise even more. And to this point, he's done it swimmingly. But Dalton Kincaid can't be disregarded just because, in the early goings, James Cook has been the center of attention for Buffalo. And so, Dalton Kincaid, I'm still holding out hope for him. I still think that he can supplant even Sam Laporta as one of the better young tight ends in the league. I also like Trey McBride as well. He also had a big bounce-back game for Arizona this past weekend. So, the tight end market, it's going to be a volatile one. You're going to say bad things about one guy, and then in a couple of weeks, you're going to be singing his praises again. So, it's definitely a versatile position. Let's talk about, this is a running joke at the GSMC Sports Network, my man, Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence. I've been telling these people, I've been telling them, Mr. Shots Below the Belt here, that Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence just don't work together, man. Now, we can chalk up their ineptitude offensively yesterday against Cleveland as the injury to Evan Engram, another tight end that we haven't talked about a lot and is definitely an X factor in terms of the tight end market in fantasy. But seeing as to how Christian Kirk technically is still the wide receiver 1 or the deep threat in this offense, you do expect a lot more out of him, especially concerning the fact that you want to have, as Andre says, both my running backs are injured. Tell me who they are, my man, and we'll talk about them as well. Pacheco and K9, ooh, that's a rough one, man, because both of those guys I was going to talk about later in the week as my personal fantasy running back picks for week 3, but it's just been crazy, man. The injuries, man. You have to kind of keep your pulse on all of them. At least I have Monty and Mason to fill in. Those are 2 fantastic options. So Andre, as always, having a contingency plan to supplement his fantasy team. As shots below the belt, saying you're going to drop two of my guy, and Jamar Chase looks pretty bad. Adds Andre. Let me address shots below the belt. He knows that I have two on my fantasy team, and I have to drop him. I have to drop him because he's going to probably sit out most of the season. Consider his options, whether it be retirement or continuing in the NFL. Very Andrew Luck-like situation, I believe. I believe that this season he will play. And then, like Andrew Luck, he'll probably play another season to the full and maybe announce retirement, then hang up the boots then. But I have to drop two, obviously. I like the market, though, in fantasy right now. I like the market. I'm not mad at what I see when I look at the QBs available on the waiver wire, so I definitely have a lot of options. And in terms of Jamar Chase, looking pretty bad. That's just a guy who has a lot of off-field external issues as well, and I just think it's holding him back. You know what I mean? It's just holding this whole team back. They could have stolen that game, yes. That questionable penalty was enough for the Chiefs to win it at the end. But, man, Jamar Chase. But I actually didn't talk about this guy, and I will kind of foreshadow tomorrow's segment. Andre Yoshevas. 7 yards to the air only, but 2 of them were touchdowns, man. If Andre Yoshevas can be a red zone threat, then maybe we can be looking at the future of the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver room. As funny as it is to say, as, you know, the whole contract situation has to be figured out. But thank you guys for indulging me. You've been great with the comments, especially my man, Shots Below the Belt, kind of alluding to all our GSMC goings on, and my man Andre as well. But thank you guys for tuning in. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Podcast. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. Continue doing a great job commenting the super chats, super thanks, and super stickers features here on YouTube. But as always, we'll be right back here tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern for another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in yet again.